He realized he had grown used to the war at the moment when the explosion behind the wall did not make him flinch, and that realization struck harder than any shelling, because the fear had not disappeared suddenly but quietly, giving way to a calm that had nothing to do with courage and felt like the slow fading of something human inside. "Did you hear that?" a young fighter said, looking at him with wide-open eyes in which panic still lived. "It was close, very close. We were lucky it wasn't us this time." He looked at the boy and did not answer right away, because he did not know how to explain what he felt, and when he spoke, his voice was frighteningly even. "It's not close or far," he said. "It's just a sound, and if you start measuring distance, then it's already too late to be afraid, because war doesn't ask whether you're ready." The boy fell silent, trying to understand, and in that pause he saw something in himself for the first time, something he had not noticed before, because he no longer waited for the end, no longer thought about home, no longer imagined life after. He lived in a mode where today was enough and tomorrow was unnecessary. "You talk as if you don't care," another one said carefully, older, with a voice in which envy and anxiety were mixed, "as if all of this has become normal for you." He smiled crookedly without joy, because that word hurt. "That's exactly what's frightening," he replied, looking into the darkness where the flashes no longer seemed threatening. "Not that we are here, but that we begin to call this life. Because war does not kill immediately. It first teaches you to live next to death as if it were furniture." Another explosion rolled somewhere on the horizon, and no one dropped to the ground. No one covered their head with their hands, because everyone simply waited to see if there would be another one. And it was in that indifferent synchrony that he felt how habituation had become collective. "What if this is adaptation?" someone said quietly, almost with hope. "What if this is how it has to be to survive?" He turned sharply, and for the first time in a long while, anger appeared in his gaze, pure and cold. "Survival is not when you don't care," he said harshly. "Survival is when it still hurts. But you don't let the pain make you empty, because the moment you become comfortable among explosions, the war has already won, even if you are still alive." The silence after these words was heavier than the roar of artillery, because everyone suddenly caught themselves realizing that they too had stopped counting the days, and it became clear that the first act of this story is not about battles and not about the enemy, but about the moment when a person notices that they have grown used to war, and for the first time truly fears not death, but the possibility that returning back to normal life may already be impossible. Habituation crept in unnoticed, like cold into the bones, and he realized it not during a battle, but in small things, when he began to wake up because of silence rather than explosions, when his brain itself filled in the sound of a shot if it did not come, because war had taught him a simple, cruel logic. The absence of chaos is only a pause before something worse. "I used to be unable to fall asleep without counting the seconds between explosions," he said to one of the fighters, watching him nervously turn an empty shell casing in his hands. "And now I wake up if there aren't any, because silence feels suspicious, as if we were forgotten alive." The fighter raised his eyes, and there was no fear in them, only fatigue, deep and heavy, the kind that dulls everything else. "I think the same way," he answered after a pause. "When it's quiet, I start waiting for an order, even if the radio is silent, because the brain no longer knows how to be on its own. It constantly needs a threat. Otherwise, it gets lost." He listened to these words and felt a dull anger rising inside, directed not at the enemy and not at the command, but at the very fact that war had rewritten them so deeply that now they needed it, like pain one grows used to. "This is not just a habit," he said harshly, almost accusatory. "It's an addiction, because war gives simple answers. Where to stand, whom to fear, when to run, and when to shoot. And the longer you stay here, the more frightening the thought becomes that one day those answers will disappear." Nearby, someone laughed briefly, dryly, without joy, and that laughter cut sharper than a scream. "And you think someone is waiting for us without this?" he said without looking up. "There, where there are no sirens, no one will tell you good job just for making it to evening, and I'm not sure I know how to live without that simple meaning." He fell silent, because there was a truth in those words that he did not want to admit. The truth that getting used to war is not only about fear, but also about comfort in clear rules, where life is reduced to a minimum, but at least understandable. "That's why it's dangerous," he said at last, looking at faces changed by dirt and lack of sleep. "Because one day the war will end, and we will remain. And if we learn to live only here, among explosions and orders, then peace will become more alien to us than the enemy." Somewhere far away it thundered again, and this time he noticed how several people almost synchronously relaxed their shoulders, as if the sound confirmed that the world was still in place, and in that moment, real fear washed over him, cold and honest. "We began to feel safe only when we are threatened again," he whispered, more to himself than to the others. "And if that is not addiction, then I don't know what to call it." The silence after these words was heavy, because everyone recognized themselves in them, and it became clear that the second act of this story is not about battles and not about getting used to death, but about a frightening realization. War is gradually becoming home, and a home built on fear does not let go without a fight. Part 3. He caught himself realizing that he had begun to anticipate the war, not through intelligence reports or orders, but through sensations in his body. When the air became too quiet, his skin tightened on its own, and this was the worst proof of adaptation. The war no longer came from outside, it lived inside him, reacting faster than conscious thought. "Have you noticed," he said to a fighter sitting nearby, silently cleaning his weapon without any real need, "that we prepare ourselves even when nothing is happening, as if we're afraid that without constant readiness we'll lose the meaning of our own existence?" The fighter didn't look up, but his voice was tense, as if the words were pressing outward. "I'm afraid of something else," he said after a long pause. "I'm afraid that if all this suddenly ends, I won't feel relief. Because without war, I won't know who I am. Here, everything is simple. Either you hold on or you disappear." Those words struck harder than any truth before, because he understood that adaptation had gone deeper than fear of death. It had reached identity itself. War now defined not only actions, but self-worth. "It's a trap," he said sharply, anger breaking through for the first time in a long while. "When your life has meaning only because someone nearby can kill you, you're not living anymore. You're just functioning in a threat response mode." The fighter looked up, anger mixed with hurt in his eyes, because it hurt to hear. "So what are you suggesting?" he asked. "To remember a home that might not even exist anymore? People who don't know who we've become, a world where there's no place for this version of us?" He didn't answer right away, knowing the honest answer would be brutal. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but heavy. "I'm suggesting we don't let the war decide who we'll be after it," he said, "because if we give it that right, it wins, even without a final shot." Another explosion echoed nearby, and this time he noticed several people almost relax in unison, as if the sound returned the world to familiar boundaries. In that second, he realized the third act of this story was the most dangerous one, because adaptation had stopped being a reaction. It had become a need. "We've started trusting war more than silence," he whispered, staring into the darkness. "And if we don't stop this now, one day peace will scare us more than any shelling." The words hung heavy and uncomfortable in the air, because everyone felt they were true, and it became clear that what lay ahead wasn't a battle with the enemy, but an internal fracture, where a person either remembers who they were before the war, or finally accepts it as the only possible way to exist. Part 4. The break didn't begin with panic or retreat. It began with a strange calm that settled over the positions when people stopped reacting even to close explosions. And that calm was more frightening than hysteria, because it meant the war no longer wounded. It had moved in. "Have you noticed," he said to the commander, watching fighters slowly, almost indifferently rise after another blast. They don't ask, "Is everyone alive?" anymore. They ask, "Can we sit back down?" As if death has become background noise, not an event. The commander stayed silent for a long time, and in that silence there was more admission than in any order. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, broken. "I'm not afraid they'll die," he said. "I'm afraid of the day they survive and return to a place without sirens and suddenly realize they don't know how to live without them." The words hung heavy, because everyone recognized their own future in them. And at that moment, he saw one of the fighters snap in irritation over something trivial. A delay with water, someone's slowness. The outburst was disproportionate, dangerous, as if all the accumulated tension was searching for any outlet. "This is no longer a reaction to war," he said quietly, but firmly. "This is war speaking through us, when any discomfort feels like a threat, because we've grown used to living only at the edge." The commander nodded and suddenly slammed his fist into the bunker wall, not from rage, but from helplessness. "No one taught us this," he said bitterly. "They taught us how to shoot, move, survive. No one taught us how not to let war become our character." Night slowly fell, and in the darkness he realized the worst was still ahead. Because the real battle wouldn't begin during an attack, but when a chance for silence appeared, and someone among them realized they didn't want it. "We've reached a point," he said, looking at people sitting silently, not even talking to each other, "where either we start resisting adaptation or it becomes us. And then the war will end only formally. Inside, it will go on." The commander slowly raised his eyes to him. There was no order in that look, only a request, deeply human. "If you know how to stop this," he said, "say it now. Because I see them fading, not physically, but as people. And I'm not sure we'll survive another month of silence between shellings without losses." He had no ready answer. And that was the most honest thing of all, because he understood the fourth act of this story was the point where experience, orders, and survival could no longer be used as shields. Adaptation to war required a different kind of fight, quiet, stubborn, daily. And the ending would depend on whether a person could remember who they were before fear became home. Part 5. He realized adaptation no longer hid itself when he caught the thought that peace frightened him more than an explosion. An explosion was understandable. It had sound, direction, consequences. But silence after war was shapeless. It had no instructions, no orders, no justification for who you had become. "What if we can't go back?" someone said in the darkness, the voice quiet, almost shy, but trembling with real fear. "What if, where there's no shelling, we're more dangerous than we are here?" He stayed silent for a long time, because this wasn't a question answered quickly. When he spoke, there was no pathos in his voice, only heavy, earned honesty. "Then the war has won completely," he said. "Not because it destroyed us physically, but because it taught us to live only in tension. And if we accept that as normal, we'll return not as people, but as fragments that react to every sound as a threat." The commander stepped closer, his face exhausted, but his gaze clear, as if he too had made a decision. "No one trained us for this fight," he said. "But if we don't start it now, we'll lose later, without the right to fire a shot, without the right to make a mistake." It was quiet around them, and for the first time, that silence didn't feel hostile. It was heavy, but real. He felt something inside resisting the habit. Not loudly, not heroically, but stubbornly, like pain that hasn't gone numb yet. "We can't fully return ourselves," he said, looking at the people listening not as soldiers, but as human beings. "But we can refuse to let the war take everything, and for that, we must do the hardest thing, feel, even when it's easier to feel nothing." No one applauded. No one thanked him. This wasn't a victory. But in that silence, he saw someone wipe their eyes, someone slowly unclench their fists. And those small movements mattered more than any order. "If we can be afraid of peace," he added quietly, and still step into it, then we're still alive. And the war has not become our only language. When night finally covered the positions, it brought neither relief nor fear. It brought understanding. The real ending of war isn't announced in reports. It begins where a person decides not to live forever in combat mode. And in that moment he understood that adaptation can't be broken by one decision or heroism, but by a daily choice to remain human, even when war has done everything to make that seem unnecessary. And that choice was the only victory it could never take away.